Few people truly understand what happens to an elderly person's soul after death. Many avoid thinking about it, perhaps out of fear, uncertainty, or not knowing where to find reliable answers. But there comes a point in life when these questions become unavoidable. As the body ages and the signs of time become visible, thoughts about what comes next become more frequent. It's then that the age-old questions arise. What happens to our consciousness? Is there something beyond? Is death an end or a transition? Dolores Cannon dedicated much of her life to investigating these questions through accounts that went beyond common logic. Her conclusions weren't based on theories, but on hundreds of regressions conducted with people from different cultures, ages, and beliefs. And what she discovered may transform how you view death from now on. Throughout her decades of work, Dolores Cannon gathered information suggesting that the soul not only survives physical death, but undergoes a specific process of transition. According to her studies, particularly with the elderly, this process can differ from that of a younger person. The reason is simple. An elderly person's soul has already accumulated enough experiences and is often ready to take the next step. This doesn't mean everyone departs peacefully, but many reach the final stage with a certain acceptance or even relief. Knowing this can bring comfort and clarity. Therefore, if this topic resonates with you in any way, consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Let's delve deeper together into what the science of the soul has to tell us in a clear, respectful, and informed manner. According to Dolores, the moment of death is more serene than one might imagine. There's no pain, no suffering, but rather a liberation from the physical body. The soul gently detaches like someone waking from a long dream, and in this awakening, it's supported. There are presences that welcome it, departed family members, or beings whose role it is to provide comfort. For the elderly, this welcome is often even gentler. Dolores said there's a kind of spiritual reverence for the journey they've completed. The soul, upon leaving the body, often experiences brief confusion. It doesn't immediately understand what has happened, but it soon perceives the change. The body no longer responds. The pain has ceased, and the lightness felt is indescribable, although many describe it in sessions as a kind of profound and immediate relief. In this state, the soul doesn't wander aimlessly, as some myths suggest. There's an organization, a structure that guides each soul according to its journey. Dolores called this process preparation for the next phase. In the case of the elderly, it's common for the soul to review its life in detail, a kind of review where important events reappear with clarity. There are no external judgments, only understanding and analysis. The soul observes what it lived, as if watching a movie with the feelings still present but without suffering. It's a moment of learning, not punishment. Many elderly people report, even while alive, that they frequently experience flashes of the past. Dolores believed this was a sign that the soul was already beginning, little by little, to detach. After this review, the soul is guided to a space she called the recovery zone. This environment isn't physical, but it's perceived as real. Its purpose is to allow the soul to rest and reorganize itself after the experience of life. For those who have lived a long time, faced pain, losses, and transformations, this zone functions as a kind of well-deserved rest. Dolores said that for the elderly, this period is like a spiritual convalescence, a quiet time where there are no demands, only comfort. In this space, the soul begins to recover its natural energy, shedding denser memories and preparing for new decisions. Some will choose to return, others will move on to dimensions that are still beyond our current understanding. Most interestingly, according to her, this process isn't automatic or imposed. The soul has choices, and the choices are respected. Some wish to return quickly, others prefer to wait or simply continue learning on other planes. Dolores emphasized that there's no punishment, no heaven or hell in the traditional religious sense. What exists is a continuation of the journey, and for the elderly who departed with fear or suffering, there's even more care. Specialized spiritual beings help these souls understand what's happening and free themselves from what still weighs them down. This shows that death, for those who have lived long lives, isn't an abrupt break, but a carefully guided transition full of meaning and possibilities. Often, an elderly person's soul has prepared to depart long before the body shows signs. Dolores observed that in regression sessions, elderly people nearing death reported recurring dreams of serene places, reunions with deceased relatives, and feelings of detachment. These dreams aren't just constructs of the unconscious, but signs that the soul is being guided, little by little, to its next stage. There's a wisdom that begins to manifest internally. It's not uncommon for elderly people to express, calmly, that they're ready to go. This doesn't come from a renunciation of life, but from a deep understanding that the cycle has been completed. For many, this brings an unusual peace, difficult for those far from this stage to understand. Another important point raised by Dolores is the role of living family members in this process. How we deal with the death of a loved one directly influences the soul's experience after departure. Excessive attachment, despair, or denial can hinder the soul's complete detachment from the physical plane. Therefore, she always recommended that family members, even amidst grief, seek to send feelings of acceptance and gratitude. This creates a kind of bridge of light, facilitating the passage. For the elderly, this support is essential. They need to feel they can go in peace, without leaving behind invisible chains of guilt or obligation. When there are sincere farewells, without despair, the soul finds it easier to follow its natural path with lightness and serenity. In her investigations, Dolores also noticed that time isn't experienced in the same way on the spiritual plane. What seems like a long wait to us is just an instant to the soul. This is important to understand why some deceased elderly people seem to communicate little in dreams or signs. They haven't disappeared, they're just in another perception of time and space. The connection continues to exist, but manifests subtly, almost imperceptibly. Often the soul's silence is just a natural pause, a moment of rest. It doesn't mean absence of love or forgetfulness. Dolores explained that by understanding this, we can maintain a healthy bond with those who have departed, without clinging to pain or the expectation of immediate manifestations that may not always come as we imagine. During the transition process, the elderly person's soul goes through a phase of remembering its essence. Little by little, it sheds the earthly identity, the name, the story, the pains, and the physical limitations. It begins to recognize itself as something greater, freer, and connected to a universal consciousness. This recognition doesn't happen abruptly. It's as if the soul awakens from an old dream and begins to remember who it truly is. Dolores said that this moment is profoundly liberating, especially for those who have lived with limitations or illnesses. Feeling whole again, without pain, without weight, without fear, is one of the first experiences of the soul after death. And this in itself already transforms the entire view we have about the end of life. Dolores also shared reflections on how the soul maintains bonds with those who are still alive. According to her accounts, the elderly person's soul may remain close for some time, observing, caring, and sending subtle impressions to loved ones. This happens especially when there's still something to be understood or healed. It's not a forced permanence, but a choice of the soul itself, which wishes to complete its journey with dignity and compassion. Many family members report feeling presences, smells, music, or even thoughts that don't seem to be their own. Dolores interpreted this as small signs that the soul is nearby, not to frighten but to comfort. These moments are valuable and should be welcomed with respect, without fear or distrust. It's important to understand that the aging of the body doesn't mean the weakening of the soul. On the contrary, Dolores believed that the more the body gives way, the more the soul strengthens. She compared this to a candle that, when extinguished, releases its purest essence. The elderly person's soul, when freed from the body, often shines more intensely than ever before. This invites us to revise our idea of death and old age, not as decadence, but as a natural transition, rich in meaning. When we understand this process with maturity, we can better prepare for it, and also help our loved ones make this journey with more dignity and peace. Dolores Cannon dedicated a large part of her life to gathering consistent accounts that reinforced the idea that there's no real loss in death, only a change of state. She said that the elderly person's soul, upon leaving the body, returns to a place it already knows, even if it doesn't remember consciously. This return is accompanied by a deep recognition, like someone returning home after a long trip. This explains why so many elderly people at the end of life talk about feeling like they've been there before. Many mention a sense of familiarity when describing near-death experiences. Dolores interpreted this as the soul's memory emerging as the body weakens. It's as if the physical mind loses space and the original consciousness gains presence. Another important discovery of Dolores was that the elderly person's soul doesn't carry regrets in the same way as younger people. This happens because the time lived brings more acceptance. The soul understands that every choice had a reason, every mistake had a role. This broader perspective arises naturally with age and intensifies after death. During regressions, many souls demonstrated gratitude for what they lived, even in difficult experiences. For Dolores, this feeling was a sign of spiritual evolution. The elderly person, upon dying, doesn't go to a court of judgment, but to a state of expanded consciousness, where everything is understood more profoundly. This perspective brings relief and helps us understand that life isn't measured by perfection, but by inner growth. In some sessions, Dolores encountered souls that even after death still felt trapped by old traumas or unresolved situations. In these cases, the transition process was more careful. Specialized spiritual beings assisted in releasing these pains. For the elderly, this support was even more present, as many carried silent guilt, accumulated losses, and ingrained fears. The spiritual plane, according to Dolores, respects each journey and offers the necessary support for the soul to free itself from what no longer serves it. This care shows that there's no rigid pattern for death. Each soul is unique and will be guided according to its story. And for those who departed with suffering, there's always an opportunity for healing and reconciliation, even on the other side. Another aspect observed by Dolores is that the elderly person's soul often develops a new mission after passing on. This may seem strange, but according to her studies, not all missions end with physical death. Often, the soul continues to act as a spiritual guide for family members, or even for other souls in the learning process. This explains why some people feel the presence of their grandparents or parents as a kind of constant protection. Dolores stated that this bond remains active as long as there's a connection of affection and purpose. Death, in this case, doesn't interrupt the relationship. It only transforms its form of existence. Knowing this can bring comfort and even change the way we deal with loss, replacing paralyzing grief with a new form of connection. For Dolores, understanding what happens to the elderly person's soul is a way to live more consciously. It's not just about waiting for death with resignation, but about seeing this moment as part of a natural cycle. Preparation for this passage begins while still alive, in thoughts, feelings, and daily attitudes. Aging, according to her, is an opportunity to align the spirit with its essence, shedding weights that no longer serve. Each forgiveness granted, each grievance left behind, each gesture of gratitude is a step in this direction. This makes the transition process smoother and allows the soul to detach with serenity. Living the end of life well isn't denying death, but integrating it into the path with lucidity and respect. At this point, it's important to emphasize that there's no exact formula for what happens after death. Even Dolores Cannon, with all her experience, recognized that the spiritual world is vast and full of nuances. What she did was gather recurring patterns that appeared in deep hypnosis sessions, listening to the souls themselves recount their experiences. Each story was unique, but many elements were repeated, such as the feeling of welcome, the reunion with loved ones, and the continuous learning. For the elderly especially, these experiences brought great comfort, knowing that life continues, that there's a greater meaning, and that nothing that has been lived is lost allows the end of the journey to be faced with courage and even a certain lightness. Dolores Cannon's vision didn't propose beliefs, but possibilities based on consistent accounts that spanned decades of study. Her approach was investigative, focused on listening, recording, and understanding what the soul said when it was free from physical limitations. She didn't intend to convince anyone, only to invite reflection. And this is especially important when we talk about the soul of an elderly person. The final stage of life carries accumulated wisdom, striking memories and feelings that don't always find space to be shared. Dolores offered a rare, respectful listening, free from judgment. Therefore, so many people found comfort in her words, because more than ready-made answers, she brought a possible map to a territory that all of us sooner or later will cross. Understanding what can happen to the soul after death changes the way we live. Dolores Cannon said that when we lose the fear of the end, we begin to value each present moment more. It's not about living as if there were no tomorrow, but about living with the awareness that each gesture, each word, each choice has real value. For the elderly, this can mean rescuing bonds, expressing stored feelings, or simply accepting one's own history with compassion. The soul that departs in peace is the one that managed to look back without resentment. And when this happens, the transition process becomes almost natural, as if the soul, upon fulfilling its role, only changed its clothing to follow a new journey, lighter, freer, more aligned with its essence. Many accounts brought by Dolores indicate that, after death, the soul undergoes experiences that broaden its understanding of the universe. There are encounters with higher consciousnesses, learning about universal laws, and a deep feeling of belonging. There's no loneliness. The soul of an elderly person, especially, is welcomed with respect for the path it has traveled. It's like being received by a community of beings that recognize the effort, the courage, and the love lived. And this recognition is real, felt clearly by the soul. This helps to heal old wounds and integrate the entire journey into a broader perspective. Dolores reinforced that there's nothing to fear in this process. On the contrary, there's much to be understood and welcomed with an open heart. In concluding her studies, Dolores Cannon left a legacy of understanding and respect for the mystery of life and death. Her work didn't propose to replace religions or dogmas, but to offer a new lens on the human soul. For the elderly, this represents a valuable opportunity to prepare not with fear, but with awareness. Knowing that there's a process, that there's welcome and continuity, transforms the experience of departure into something less dark. It's not the end of everything, but a transition to another form of existence. And even if we can't yet prove it with traditional methods, the number of consistent accounts and the positive impact they cause on those who hear them are, in themselves, an indication that perhaps there's more than we imagine. Therefore, when thinking about the death of an elderly person, it's possible to see more than absence or loss. We can see a cycle that closes, a journey that finds rest, a soul that returns to its purest state. Dolores Cannon taught us that life isn't just what we see here, but a part of something much bigger. And when we look at this with serenity, we can live the time we have left better and also honor with more love those who have already departed. The soul doesn't disappear, doesn't dissolve, doesn't get lost. It continues, transformed, at peace, following its journey in other dimensions of learning. This understanding allows us to transform grief into gratitude and fear into trust, bringing light to a topic that for so long has been shrouded in silence and fear. If this video has brought you peace, clarity, or comfort, consider sharing it with someone who needs to hear this. Your subscription and your support help keep this important conversation alive, allowing more people to find paths of understanding about life and what comes after. May we look at old age and death with less fear and more humanity, remembering that each soul has its time, its story, and its light. And that, according to Dolores Cannon, no journey ends with the last breath. It just begins again on another plane, where love and wisdom continue to guide our steps.